Welcome back. We start our news bulletin from US President Donald Trump, who has rejected Iran's talks offer. In a tweet, Trump said no thanks to Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif's proposal on condition of lifting sanctions. Reacting to Trump's tweet, Zarif advised the US president to make his comments and decisions on facts rather than headlines. Yesterday, in an interview, the Iranian foreign minister said he is not ruling out negotiations with the US despite the killing of General Qasem Soleimani. However, he said the US must lift sanctions if it wants to resume dialogue. Zarif said the US has inflicted great harm on the Iranian people and it will have to compensate for that. In China, the death toll from the Wuhan coronavirus has jumped to 56, while nearly 2,000 people are so far infected by the incurable fatal disease. China's National Health Commission says the virus' ability to spread is getting stronger and the number of infections could continue to rise. Meanwhile, Beijing has ordered a nationwide ban on all wild animals trade. More in this report.
China has locked down over 100 million people in the hard-hit province of Hubei and neighboring Hunan in a bid to contain the spread of the deadly coronavirus. But the virus has already spread throughout China and around the world, with cases confirmed in countries as distant as France, Australia, Canada, and the US. US State Department says it is arranging a flight to evacuate its staff at its consulate in Wuhan, as well as other American citizens trapped in the city. Canada confirmed its first case of the coronavirus in a resident who recently returned from Wuhan.
So the case is in a male who's in his 50s. He had traveled to Wuhan, China, and come back, and within a day became quite ill. And the emergency service was aware of his travel history, used full precautions, was taken to Sunnybrook Hospital, and is now in a negative pressure room. All the staff are taking appropriate precautions, and the condition is stable.
Meanwhile, Hong Kong residents say the emergency measures taken by China are not enough. They say the government should limit the city's links with mainland China. They demand the government should limit Hong Kong's links with mainland China. Medical staff from other cities has arrived in Wuhan to support the fight against the virus. The symptoms of the deadly incurable disease include fever, coughing, and breathing difficulties.
Now, news on India. In Indian-occupied Kashmir, occupation forces have martyred 3 more civilians in Pulwama district. The civilians were targeted during a cordon and search operation by the Indian troops. Indian occupation forces have killed over a dozen civilians during the ongoing month of January so far. The lockdown and communications blackout of the valley by India has now entered its 174th day. Meanwhile, Kashmiris on both sides of the line of control and around the world are observing the Indian Republic Day as Black Day. The worldwide protest rallies are being held to draw global attention towards the Indian atrocities in the occupied valley. In their statement, the Hurriyat leaders have called for rallies and protests in the occupied valley in defiance of the ongoing curfew. India has completely shut down the valley for the last 5 months, leading to medical, communications, and education crises worsening by the day. India is observing its 71st Republic Day in celebration of the country's constitution. But Indians at home and abroad fear the constitution is now under attack by the ruling BJP government and its extremist ideology. This report will now tell you more.
Since the re-election of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in May last year, India has been in serious socio-political turmoil. BJP government's authoritarian and discriminatory measures have eroded New Delhi's secular ideology as its international image crumbles. The illegal annexation and lockdown of occupied Kashmir and the controversial Citizenship Act have sparked mass protests across the country.
We've seen today the crowds in Shaheen Bagh every night here, and this is being repeated in so many places, so many different kinds of conversations are happening, and that's what we needed. We now, Indians, we live on the streets. Long live the street.
Indians inside the country and abroad are raising their voice against the act, terming it anti-Muslim. Modi's government has been guilty of bait and charging peaceful demonstrations and subjecting women to sexual harassment and assault. Attacks on Jawaharlal Nehru and Jamia Millia universities in New Delhi by BJP-linked groups have fueled further dissent.
We are sitting for a mass hunger strike. We have been protesting against the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which has now become Citizenship Amendment Act for the past 2 months. We want to tell this government to start thinking about Assam now. Why are you not thinking about Assam?
27 protesters have so far been killed in protests.
Indian southern state of Telangana is all set to pass a resolution against the controversial Citizenship Act. Earlier, states of Rajasthan, Punjab and Kerala have passed resolutions as protests against the act continue in India.
Telangana Chief Minister Chandrasekhar Rao has also raised his voice against the citizenship law. Talking to the media, Rao said he will call a conclave of ministers in the next 1 month to take this step. He said this new act is a concern for the future of the country as this is not good for India. Meanwhile, Muslim organization Tawheed Jamaat and other non-political Islamic bodies protested against the law in Tamil Nadu. Thousands of people took part in the march from Uzvar Sandi to Tiruyuchi electorate, where a public meeting was held. The demonstrators raised anti-government and anti-Modi slogans. Elsewhere, Indian Congress leader Chidambaram has called for speeding up the protests on India's Republic Day. In a tweet, he said the country is raising flag. It should also raise the level of protests.
On India's Republic Day, anti-New Delhi banners appeared in Bangladeshi capital Dhaka against its anti-Muslim policies. The civil society put up banners across the city highlighting Kashmir crisis and the controversial Citizenship Act. The banners are inscribed with slogans demanding an end to India's lockdown of occupied Kashmir and the discriminatory new law. The protest banners have also demanded the end of civilians' killings by Indian forces at India-Bangladesh border. Meanwhile, a student staged a sit-in against the Bangladeshi civilians' killings at the border with India. The student demanded apology from India and an inquiry committee on the Indian forces' attacks. In London, thousands of Indians and British held a mass rally against India's controversial citizenship law. The students, activists and human rights organizations gathered opposite Downing Street for the protest. They marched around a mile down the streets to gather outside the Indian High Commission. Meanwhile, another protest is scheduled for today outside Indian House in London to observe a Black Day. The Indian High Commission has raised serious concerns for the safety of the mission. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has pledged robust security to prevent any violence during the protests. Now on towards Middle East. In Lebanon, security forces have fired water cannons and tear gas at protesters trying to breach barricade outside government headquarters in Beirut. Protesters have accused security forces of torture as the uprising hit the 100-day mark. Lebanon's internal security forces said, amid rioting and attacks, peaceful protesters are requested to leave Riyadh al-Sol area. Earlier, peaceful demonstrations turned violent after police clashed with the protesters. Lebanon has been hit by a wave of protest against the ruling political class. Syria's Arab army says its units have targeted rebel shelters in the west of Aleppo. State media said the army bombarded terrorist positions along the line from Jamaat al-Zahra to al-Rashidin. It said the mission was carried out in retaliation to the breaches and attacks against safe neighborhoods in Aleppo. The Syrian army claims heavy losses were inflicted, including the destruction of a number of rocket and mortar shell launch pads. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has accused Libya's Eastern Forces commander Khalifa Haftar of continuing attacks despite a ceasefire. Erdogan said Haftar could not be trusted to uphold the truce. He said it is not possible to expect mercy and understanding from someone like Haftar. Erdogan's statement comes after the UN said several countries violated the arms embargo in Libya agreed at the Berlin conference. In a statement, the UN support mission said the illegal influx of fighters and weapons into the country threatens the fragile peace process. Street protests have flared up once again in Chile's capital, Santiago. Protesters are demonstrating against economic inequality and the right-wing government. Police fired tear gas and water cannon to disperse the raging crowd near the capital's Plaza Italia. Meanwhile, a Chilean police officer appeared in court to face charges for wounding a protester's eye. The officer was formally accused of having fired buckshot into the left eye of a protester. Since October, the country has been in the midst of its worst social unrest. Chile has issued a red alert after a forest fire burned over 2 square kilometers of vegetation in the southern region of BEEKEEPING. The fire zone includes part of the Nonguien National Reserve in Conapsican province, which is a habitat for some endangered species. Conapsican Governor Robert Contreras said efforts to extinguish fire are underway. He said authorities are monitoring the situation and evaluating the damage. Contreras said there are no reports of casualties so far and the area has already been evacuated. Local authorities are concerned about predictions of high temperature that increases the risk of the wildfires. 30 people have been killed, including 2 children, by storms in southeastern Brazil. Officials say 7 people are injured due to landslides and house collapses in Minas Gerais state. 3,500 were evacuated in Minas Gerais state, while the government says 17 are still missing. Several highways have been cut by the flooding and scores of bridges knocked out. Rainfall in the region has been the heaviest since records were first kept 110 years ago. In one 24-hour period, state capital Belo Horizonte recorded 172 millimeters of rain. The flood coincided with the first anniversary of the dam collapse in the Minas Gerais town of Brumadinho. In Peru, the death toll in the explosion of a gas tanker has risen to 14. The tanker carrying 10,000 liters of liquefied gas exploded, igniting a major fire that destroyed several houses and vehicles in the capital, Lima. The health ministry said dead included 5 children and a 40-year-old man from Venezuela. The accident in the capital, where El Salvador district, left nearly 50 others seriously injured. Investigators believe the explosion was triggered by a detachment of a fuel house as the tanker truck passed over a speed bump. Peruvians are set to vote today to elect a new parliament after the previous one was dissolved by President Martin Vizcarra. 21 parties are running in elections, and exit polls suggest centrist politicians could win a majority. Under the country's electoral laws, parties require at least 5% of the popular vote or 7 elected legislators to gain representation. The high number of undecided voters could result in a fragmented Congress. Voting is mandatory in Latin America's 5th largest economy, and some 25 million people are eligible to vote. Vizcarra had dissolved the chamber in September last year, after arguing that lawmakers were obstructing his anti-corruption agenda. Welcome back. This week, we witnessed some natural calamities in parts of the world. In Turkey, the death toll from Friday's earthquake has surged to 31. The 6.8 magnitude quake was centered in Elazığ province and neighboring Malatya. Disaster and Emergency Management Authority said over 1,500 people have been injured. The authorities said 45 people, including a woman, have been so far rescued from under the rubble. Over 3,400 personnel with hundreds of vehicles and 17 sniffer dogs are taking part in the rescue operation. 31 people are dead, while over 100,000 displaced by week-long heavy rains in Madagascar's northwest. National Disaster Management Office says 15 people are still missing as flooding intensified in the districts of Metsinju and Mevitana. National Bureau of Disaster Risk Management has warned of high risks of food insecurity amid flooding in lowland and rice-growing areas. Rain swept away strips of roads, cutting off access to the affected areas. A dam burst near the town of Tanambe, flooding nearby villages and farmland. German charity CHILE has rescued 78 migrants off the Libyan coast. It said 8 women and 7 children are among those rescued. The charity said its ship rescued 62 people from an inflatable boat. It said the rescue ship rescued another 16 people from a second boat. The CHILE has accused Libyan coast guards of harassment, saying they treat the area of search and rescue operations as their territorial waters. War-struck Yemen is now struggling with a dengue outbreak. The disease has infected hundreds of children as the ongoing war impedes efforts to fight the world's fastest-spreading virus. The World Health Organization has also shown concerns over the spread of the disease. More in this report.
In crowded hospitals, an unhygienic atmosphere only increases the problems faced by Yemen's children. Workers are struggling to clean an insect-filled pool of stagnant rainwater gathering in the battered port city of Hodeidah.
Dengue has been spreading fast these days, and when you have not 1, 2, 3, but 4 patients, where can you go? The private hospitals are very expensive and we can't afford it.
The World Health Organization says dengue is one of the world's top 10 public health threats.
Well, in 2019, there was more than 76,000 suspected cases of dengue across Yemen, with 271 associated deaths. When it comes to areas that are most affected, the governorate of Hodeidah has been seeing, for example, 70% of all alerts end of 2019. So this is the area that is the most affected, and at the same time, it's an area of active fighting.
An aid organization claims they are receiving reports of deaths on a daily basis from remote areas. Local authorities say they are struggling to control the outbreak of the disease.
The measures that were taken are to fill all the swamps in cooperation with the local authorities. Yesterday and the day before in Hodeidah, the cases have decreased in the countryside and we have filled up and closed the majority of the swamps.
There is no specific treatment and no widely available vaccine for dengue. Yemen's civil war, now in its 5th year, has killed over 100,000 people. The United Nations has described the country's situation as one of the world's worst humanitarian crises.
In Nicaragua, beekeeping is a highly lucrative alternative for small-scale farmers, but climate change is affecting their business. One local beekeeper has turned to raising queen bees to improve the quality and production of this honey. Climate change is rapidly affecting daily life and habitats around the globe. In Nicaragua, beekeeping is considered one of the most profitable businesses. The country exports 442 tons of natural honey to the world. But beekeepers say the change in climate is bad for honey production.
We have an average production between 35 to 40 kilograms per beehive per year, but we have been affected by climate change and it has considerably decreased production, such as producing up to 15 kilograms per beehive per year.
Incluso hemos tenido producciones de hasta 15.
A local beekeeper, Santos Flores, has found that raising queen bees is the solution to the problem.
Y eso lo logramos.
Every year we gradually increase by 80 to 90% and we achieve this through beehive divisions. We have also activities such as natural queen breeding and artificial queen breeding.
Santos Flores says that working more technically is giving better production.
This allows us, as we have said before, to obtain a better production, because I no longer have to wait a month so that the queen bee can lay an egg. Here, I'll only have to wait 8 to 9 days, which is valuable time, relatively speaking.
Beekeepers believe the solution to their problem lies in innovation. As climate change progresses, those who remain dependent on traditional methods will be left behind. Boeing has successfully completed the first test flight of the world's largest twin-engine jet. The aircraft will officially be called 777-9, but is better known under its development code name 777X. The plane touched down at the historic Boeing field outside Seattle after almost 4 hours of flight. The almost 77-meter-long passenger jet will go head-to-head with the Airbus A350 to A38000, which seats about 360 passengers. The 777X is expected to enter service in 2021, a year later than originally scheduled amid development problems. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.